Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Tree Actions, the Human Forestry Podcast. And joining us today from my home province of Alberta, Mr. Peter Larue. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
You're welcome. And we were talking a little bit before we got started, and Tony Tresselt, my trusted co-host and producer and man of many talents, is with me as always. And you were mentioning, Tony, about our Patreon page.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we recognize Peter as being one of our Patreon members. We don't, we don't get too technical, but when we started this podcast, we decided the only way it would ever really be supported financially would be by people that listen to it. And Peter's been one of the people that signed up and joined, so greatly appreciated. It helps us kind of break even with the whole thing and give a little bit back.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that the podcast is out here, and I feel like I use the podcast, so I feel like giving back. It's something I listen to as soon as the podcasts come out. I'm listening to them, and it makes me feel like a big part of the community. Wow. I was chatting with Tony earlier before we got recording, and where I am, I've decided to be kind of out of the mainstream, out of the city. So I'm not working with other arborists a whole lot. I get summer students in every year to help me out, but the podcast has been so important to make me feel like I'm part of that community again, to listen to the people that brought me into the community and to hear their points of views. And yeah, it's been really good.
Awesome. Well, we didn't really know, we had sort of a plan for it when we started it, as far as it being a way to connect, newer people with people from the past. And it was going to be a little more focused, but it got a lot more broad in scope, and I think it became what it was supposed to be, and it's kind of its intention. And it's whenever something sort of works, then it's always cool. So thanks.
Yeah, it definitely has. You had Norm St. Jean on, and then it brings you back to those moments that got you into your career in the first place, and doing helping Norm on contracts at the University of Alberta, and first meeting him, and working with Frank Chips and Pete Chips and Norm St. Jean on a University of Alberta contract. And you don't realize where you are at the time and who you're with, and then you can really reminisce back on those days later down the road and say, you know what, I got thrown into a pretty good spot. There's few better to get thrown into.
Yeah, well, you're in a pretty unique situation, because there's other people that have been on the show that you go back to some of our hunting excursions and stuff. Quite a lot of the people that you've hung out with have been on the show.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that's the thing. When you're in the moment, like, I didn't know this young kid, to me, I was a young kid, and you're hanging out with people that, these big, like the grandfathers of the industry, of the modern industry. And then you don't realize it. And then you kind of get out of those scenarios and realize that's a special person. And, those are special times. And these are people that have a big impact on what I do on a daily basis now. And it was almost nice, you look back and it's nice not to have realized that at the time. And you just hang out with them as friends and individuals that you met.
Right.
And yeah, think about that all the time.
Oh, that's cool. I think it's I think there's I don't know what the word is. I often feel that way. Like, I can relate, I guess, as people I've met over the years. And when I meet them and interact with them, I don't, who they are. Like, I think of Dr. Shigo, for example, as I got to know him and hang out with him. We just became friends, and we just hung out, and we literally talked, and we usually talked in and around tree stuff, but it was very friendly and very personal. It wasn't like I was talking to Dr. Shigo, this quite well-known individual, right, and well-traveled, and but yeah, you do reflect on it more later. We would have loved to have had him on the show, and he would have been happy to have been on the show, but we were lucky enough to get Judy on. I don't think she's aired yet, but we had his daughter on the show, so you'll both listen to her at some point. Has she been on yet? Yeah. I don't think, Tony.
No, next couple of weeks. I think it's coming up soon, because I was just looking at the schedule. But it is coming up pretty soon.
A little different introduction to Tree Actions, or start off, but that's okay. We don't have it's Tree Actions as such remains unorganized. So We like to ask our guests, and you've heard it, Peter, but as a listener, what is your first memory or recollection where you felt a connection to trees or a tree?
Okay. Yeah. It was as an adult, and it's been a slow burn, a slow process. So a lot of the guests on the podcast talk about, oh yeah, I was young, my dad was into trees, or I had this experience. I was always climbing trees. I grew up in an apartment building in Winnipeg, and I had nothing to do with trees. I had hardly anything. We went camping once a year. I love nature and I love the outdoors, but I wouldn't call that a connection with trees at all. I tree planted up in, central northern British Columbia, but I didn't feel connected to that at all. I didn't feel that was a part of my tree upbringing. I started to really enjoy working with nature and the outdoors when I was living in Victoria, in Vic West, actually not far from Esquimalt on Vancouver Island. And I got a job as a groundsman for an organic landscaping company, and I was weeding, mowing lawns, that kind of stuff. But every time there was an apple tree or a fruit tree or ornamental trees to prune, I felt myself gravitating towards doing it. And so that would be where I kind of, when you're looking back on it, those are the moments that, okay, that was the beginning. That was that first little sprout, that little branch that took off, that little pathway that I decided to go on. And at the time, I didn't really feel connected. I just knew that it was something I enjoyed doing. I liked getting up on that orchard ladder, and I liked manipulating and pruning and kind of finding that balance between what the people need and the trees need and what's good for both, and that balance in the middle. And then I was enjoying life out there. I was riding my single speed bike to work every day, 25 minutes up the highway, living in Victoria, just kind of living the dream. And I was having lunch in the office one day, and the owner of the company, my boss, was on the computer, and he got an email, and he kind of turned around. I don't know if he turned around or not, or maybe he said, "Hey, you like rock climbing?" I said, "Yeah, I really like rock climbing. I haven't been in a while, but I really like it." He goes, "Yeah, and you seem to really like pruning the trees." He said, "I got this email about a tree climbing course in Vancouver, BC. It might be something you're interested in signing up for." So I said, "Yeah, sure, forward it to me." And he forwarded it to me, and I called right away. I called, and there was one spot left in the course. And I was talking to Nancy, and she said, "Yeah, there's one spot left." So I signed up for it. And that was, I think, if you look back on it, that was the last Arbor Master Canada course ever offered. It was in Queen's Park, Vancouver. So yeah, I signed up for the course. It was soon. Like, I don't know whether they were trying to fill spots or trying to fill that last spot by sending the email out, but the course was fairly quick. So I loaded up I was living van life back before van life was really trendy, but I loaded up my cargo van. I had my bed in the back already, got on the ferry and drove into Vancouver, slept on the side of the streets near Queen's Park, Vancouver. Woke up the next morning and kind of first guy there, because I was parked right outside the gates. And that's when it all began. I met Frank Chips and Thor Clausen, one of the two of the best names in the tree industry. And it was incredible. I loved it. I climbed rope. I can't say I climbed trees, but I got up to some pretty high limbs, and looking back, I didn't know what they were at the time, but looking back, I think we threw a rope in a big leaf maple with a couple big long limbs, laterals for people to get to. And man, I had fun. I had a lot of fun. And I remember Thor's history of the saddle. Almost indeed, he'd go on an hour-long talk about the history of the saddle and how it got to where we're at.
Yeah.
And I was just immersed into that world. I loved it.
Wow.
So when I got at the end, I got my diploma, right? You handed your diploma for your introduction to tree climbing, and shook Thor's hand. And then Frank shook my hand, and he looked at me and he said, "I got a company in Edmonton, and it's going to be growing here soon. And you look like you had a lot of fun with what you're doing. And if you're willing to relocate, I'd be willing to hire you." So that's it. I went back home, packed the rest. I packed my van, and in 2 weeks I was in Albertan.
Wow.
So that was it.
Like organic landscaping. I'm that
Yeah.
That's an interesting term. Like what did they do that they qualified? Like I thought organic was
It's
pretty landscapey.
it's just a part of it was that trendy term that got them hired in Victoria, and part of it was just that no chemicals were used.
Okay.
So however you want to define organic, I mean, we still drove pickups around from site to site, and we still used lawnmowers and all that. So however organic that, but it definitely got you some clients that you wouldn't have got
There
otherwise.
wasn't any electric battery mowers yet, or bikes,
No,
or cars.
or vehicles.
No, no.
The internet was fairly new. We didn't have smartphones. You weren't connected all the time. I had a pay-as-you-go phone that cost me 15 cents per text. So you didn't spend too much time talking outside your little community. So I mean, the way I got to what was then Arbor Master was through an email, and then there wasn't social media. I remember calling, and I did think about the job offer for a day or two, but I remember calling Chip's Tree Care's office, and I think it was Cynthia that answered, and she said, "Well, I'll leave a message here, and I'll get Frank to call you back at the end of the day. Him and Pete, they're out at work." Like there wasn't this ability to just call people and chat. It was call the office, leave a message, and you'll get a return call at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think there was some beauty in that. I think there was some freedom in that. I think to you and expectations were different back then, right? Like now it's like, what do you mean
Yeah.
you didn't get? I sent you a text.
Yeah, and you get
It's
chastised for not returning text right away.
well, I think that's where the internet cafe of the toilet is become quite popular. It's something to do, but you multitask even at that event, which has typically been,
Yeah.
well, it's still private, but the sanctity's been somewhat violated with the cell phone.
A little bit. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I'm
Yeah.
not saying I'm guilty of it. I'm just saying maybe it's happened once in a while.
Maybe once or twice. Yeah. But it brings us moments like this where we can, there weren't podcasts back then either, and there wasn't that ability to maintain your community unless you were in it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's right. At the times between connections were, at things like, conferences, and that's where the competitions even, which I think they still are, but we have outlets now, outlets now where we can maintain it at our leisure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess maybe potentially Tree Actions has been listened to in the commode.
Maybe.
I know that I've edited it in the bathroom. So how about that?
No, say it isn't so.
I can say
We had
that
to cut
for
that
sure.
and save that for the Patreon listeners only.
Absolutely. Just joking. I don't edit in the bathroom often. It's funny. It's something I observed when my daughter was younger, right? When she was a young teenager and had a phone, what occurred to me is her and her friends would have a conversation, and that conversation would go on for weeks, months. Like it never really ended. When they were together in person, they were, talking and conversing. Then when they were, through Snapchat and all those things that they use, like their conversations went on for months and months. Whereas, especially in the tree world, like, there's, there was certain people that I only saw once, maybe twice a year at a climbing comp or a TCI expo or an ISA show. And, so we had a conversation, we hung out for a couple of days, and then it ended, and we, went back, and it's kind of, once I realized, I'm like, oh, now I get it. Like now I kind of understand why they're on that phone all the time, because the conversation just hasn't ended. It's not like they're having a conversation every day. They're having the same one again,
Well, it really struck me. I listened to Jack Phillips' podcast the other day, and there's one sentence that I don't think is going to leave me. And that is, he said, the ability to walk through the woods without a chainsaw, or to walk through the forest without a saw. And I think we're always carrying that saw with us these days. We always have that phone. We're prepared to do things. We're prepared to do business. We're always walking through the forest with a saw. And when Jack Phillips was talking about, you need to go through a walk in the forest without a saw, and that hit me. It's like, that is a perfect way to talk about it. And I take my boys on a canoe trip every year, a backcountry canoe trip, and there's no cell service. You got to portage in 3.5 kilometers. You're hiking everything in. You get on your boat and you're gone. And I'm telling you, for the first half hour, 45 minutes of that ride, the fidgeting in that boat is unreal. Like there's a visible level of discomfort because you're walking through the forest without a saw. They've got nothing to do. They've got nothing to keep themselves busy. So they're forced to look at the trees. They're forced to look at the birds. They're forced to slow down. You're watching the water stream next to the canoe. You're looking for fish in the water, all that. But there's a visible level of discomfort it's close to an hour. And then after an hour, you realize that the boat's not moving quite as much and it's not shifting back and forth, and everyone's kind of settled into their places, and then little things start to get pointed out. Look at the dragonfly that's landed on the water. Hey, look at that osprey, he's up in the trees. Like, things start to get noticed, but because you're walking through the forest without a saw, you don't have that goal, you don't have that purpose, you're just appreciating what's out there. So after 4 or 5 days of that, the boys come back with a renewed sense of looking at what's around them and not looking at their phones all the time. And I mean, that degrades over time. So I think that's that yearly reminder that we need to go walk through the forest without a chainsaw. You need to just go walk through the trees. You don't have to do anything to them.
Can't hear you, Dwayne. Something happened.
Yeah.
Something happened, Dwayne. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was accidentally muted. Will you walk even
Now
sometimes trees in the yard is like that, right? Like even for customers. Yeah. I mean, I find as I'm getting older, maybe it's because I'm getting lazier. I don't know which, but older definitely. But it's like people. I got someone recently ask about the oak tree at our office, and I've left all the limbs on it when it was first planted, just so it had as many leaves as possible to help reestablish. I mean, that's where it gets its energy from, right? The leaves. So, but they're low to the ground, and they're just, but it's the people that owned it before it didn't like lawn. So it's just a gravel landscape, which we're just letting it be that way because it's relatively easy to maintain, kind of. But we may switch it back to lawn at some point, but it's quite a task. And the tree roots are underneath there and everything, and the trees are doing well. So we've just left it. But the point is, I don't need to raise the limbs because there's none. Never mow anywhere near the tree anyway. And even if we did put lawn in, we'd have more beds than lawn anyhow. Thing is, someone said, "Man, why haven't you pruned that?" And I'm like, "Well, why?" Well, they're just so low, you can't see the trunk, and like, there's no reason to. Like, the tree doesn't care, and it's growing that way itself. Like, it isn't, for some reason, the tree's growing that way.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you got to fix that. You got to fix that. The tree's not supposed to do that. It's like, well, that just somehow doesn't make sense, and the more time you spend, it's like Shigo said, ignorance of tree biology is still the biggest problems trees face worldwide. And it's like, well, why is the tree doing it? If the tree's doing it, maybe we should just let the tree do it. And obviously in the forest, that's the case, right? They're doing what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. In the forest, they're doing what they do. And it's important to go and look at that. Like, why would you go up and prune? Like, the trees are touching each other in the forest. You should go prune, and there's that. Why would I do that? And so in an urban landscape, I kind of bring that to the attention of homeowners. Like, the trees are touching each other. It's like, that's great. Let them touch each other. You have a forest here. This is a forest. And how much would you go and prune the forest?
Yeah.
And I'm the same way as you, Dwayne. And it's an age thing, but I think it's also an awareness level of being in the industry for so long that you get kind of tired of making a pruning cut for the sake of making a pruning cut.
Yeah.
And I more and more in conversation with clients are saying, well, I can put wood on the ground. If what you want is wood on the ground, I'm really good at putting wood on the ground. Because I did an estimate the other day, and he said, well, I don't want to come into my backyard and not know that you've been here. And I said, well, that just might be the case. Like, the trees don't need a whole lot, and I'm really good at what I do, and I'm really good at pruning trees. I'm really good at climbing them, but I'm even better at pruning them minimally to accomplish what you want and leave the trees with as much as I can. And so I looked at him and said, well, I can put wood on the ground. That's an easy job for me. And if you'd like to pay for me to put wood on the ground, let's just call it what it is. And I'll put a bunch of wood on the ground and we'll make you happy. But the trees are not going to be as happy as if I put a minimal amount of wood on the ground. If I climbed out to those tips, if I did minor reductions on stuff that I may think is going to fail in the future, then we just clear your eaves trough a little bit,
Well, and the other concept of a little is enough. You know, that trees, they're kind of like people, like you just a little adjustment they can respond to, but you
Yeah.
just whack it hard, you're going to get a rebellious response. you know,
Yeah.
it's a little different. Well, I don't know, maybe it isn't different, but it's, and I remember training linemen for pruning, utility pruning, right? We do some training with some major utilities for that stuff. And they just like can't get the idea. Like, it's a poplar. You don't realize how poplars grow. Well, yeah, the way you guys been cutting them, yeah. If you
Yeah.
cut it that hard, it's got no choice but to regrow as fast as it can. So you're telling me if we just cut this and this and this, it's just going to go
Yeah.
around and it's not going to get any more. They just wrap there. But after a while, if they try it, I remember one time though, I had a guy, I'm coaching him from the ground. He's in the bucket. I said, "Yep, there you've got your clearance." And there was like 3 or 4 cuts. They were directional. It was clear. It was just a drop to a yard. Like we were in a lake cottage community that we weren't talking like major voltages and stuff, but it needed clearing, right? And he's like, "That's it. That's good." I said, "Yep,
Yeah.
you're good." So I turned to look to the bucket to the other side. There was a couple buckets out, and I'm watching the other guy, and I hear zing, 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 zing. And I look back, and he's just cut like 4 more cuts and like whopped it, right? Pretty heavy. And it's good as sucker
Mhm.
now and everything. And I'm like, what did you do? He's like, I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it.
Yeah.
But it's something you got to learn and believe over time. And yeah, now we go back to that client. We've been training there a while, and they're like, it's funny. It actually works because you don't create a stress response. It's not going to fill that gap, and it actually can be trained to go around. And it's like, wow, this actually works. Well,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
understanding, right? The concept.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
and it's really
absolutely.
funny how people, I don't know, just it's strange. Yeah, anthropomorphism can be a real cool thing with trees, but can also be really dangerous.
Yeah. Well, they communicate a lot differently. So when you learn to communicate with a tree, it's a lot slower way of chatting.
Yeah.
We can't have a conversation with a tree like we're having right now. It's those multiple client, you're there every year for 5 years where you get to have that conversation. And every time you go there, you get to say something and the tree tells you something back. And then the next year, the tree's got a reply. And it's that year after year after year. And that's a slow conversation that we're not used to having these days. So that's where it takes time. I mean, you can tell somebody till you're blue in the face that this type of pruning will end up in this result, but until they go back 3, 4, 5 years and have a look at what they've done and then learn from it, I mean, it's a slow conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the trees talk to the turtles.
Yeah.
Like getting back to what you're talking about, Jack, when he was talking about the time in the canoe there, that they like sit and 20
Yeah.
minutes was his key number, right? You got to take 20 minutes of just being in the woods. Or then they would do it sometimes on the canoes on the lake or the pond, but then you'd start to hear the turtles. I remember him saying that specifically, hear the turtles. And I thought, wow, I don't know that I've heard a turtle, but I'm sure you probably could.
Yeah, well, we don't really get them up here, so there's different things that
Yeah.
there's different things that we can hear, when you're silent in the woods.
Well, yeah, and
And
hear hear the trees like you're talking about,
yeah,
and
yeah,
Jack taught me that too a long time ago. Like I might have mentioned it in his podcast where like he would always take time and observe, and I always thought he just
yeah,
wanted to sit and have a coffee, which he did. It was part of it, but he
yeah,
also wanted like we'd go to a site and he would just before he even walked into the park or wherever it was, he would just sit from way back in the parking lot, basically from the vehicle, not in the vehicle, but leaning against it with his espresso, and he was taking it all in, taking in
yeah.
the environment, and what was going on. And I realized after working with him a while that that's what he was doing. I was like, man, are you really that smart? And I'm ready to we got to get to working, right? Like carry the saw into the
Yeah.
wood sort of thing. But
Yeah.
I recently I like going out in the woods and doing that, but it's starting to get this time of year, 20 minutes sitting in our woods is
Ooh,
your fodder for plenty flies and mosquitoes. So
yes.
you got to be careful.
There was a nice leeway there where it was really cool. You could go and walk around, but yeah, no, it's wild here too. But like, I mean, that concept of being silent in the woods, and whether it's the turtles you start hearing, but you're a bow hunter. I'm a bow hunter,
Yeah.
and that time where you enter the forest is such a disruption of the forest ecology. Like you just feel like a stranger.
Yeah.
You absolutely feel like you're walking in there with bombs on your feet. And
Yeah.
when you get to where you're going and you sit still, there's a certain amount of time it takes for that forest to welcome you and accept you
Yep.
into its canopy. And then you start hearing things, and the birds are going to come, and the little rabbits are going to come underneath your tree stand,
Yeah,
and you hear what sounds like an elephant, but it's mice in the leaves. But that doesn't happen in 5 minutes.
No.
That doesn't happen in 10 minutes. Usually it's 15 to 20, maybe half an hour,
Yeah.
and then the forest comes alive again.
Yeah.
So this idea that we're all intruders in the forest, and that and you are, when you're walking through there, it's not a natural space for us to be anymore. So you sit there and you become part of that natural environment, and then you blend in and you become a part of it.
Yeah.
But it's an incredible feeling.
Well, it's the one of the gifts that my dog has given me, and my family here, because we just diligently walk them, and we have open land behind us, open valley, that it's not really farmable, so it's just undisturbed land, and we know the landowners, and we walk on it regularly, and it's several kilometers of boreal forest type things with ponds and stuff, and so we're the wildlife know us now. Like the crows don't fly away. They'll typically caught by, well, recently I learned from Dave actually that that the crow knows us. Like the crows know, they recognize you and everything, and I never makes sense, but I had never thought of it before. And now like almost the same place, the same time, he'll fly over and caw, and they know we're not there to hurt them, right? And other animals probably that way too. The ducks don't fly out of the ponds, and we're never out there shooting or making abnormal noise. Although the dog still likes to, put the chase when he can. And they're used to that too. But you can become part of it the more you frequent it and the more you visit it, even if it's intermittently. But I agree with you about the time span in tree stand and hunting situations when you sit in silence, waiting. And you're technically hunting, but you realize I think every bow hunter must realize that at some point you're just really luckily benefit. I think that's why so many people don't really care if they get an animal. It's just being there. Like a squirrel runs right up to you. I've had mice run right over my leg, not even know I'm there. Sometimes we're just sitting on the ground, right? And it's just it's so wild. It really is something that
it
everyone should take time to experience.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you say it's bow hunting. I call it bow hunting, but really, it's just sitting in a tree in the woods.
Yeah.
And the amount of minutes that I actually spend actively hunting, that act of actually harvesting something. I mean, you're looking at like point something % of time is actually spent doing that. The rest of the time is, that great gray owl or the great horned owl landed in the tree right across from me, and he's looking at you, and then the hawk lands right next to you, and the chickadees are bouncing around, and it's just that's the world you immerse yourself in. And it's not the the fact that you're needing that deer at the end of the day. It's just that I'm going to go sit in the woods for 2.5 hours, and I'm going to be silent, and when you come home, I'm never coming home from that with a frown on my face. You're walking back, never with a feeling of disappointment either.
It's kind of like fishing.
Usually, absolutely. It's the least frustrating sport I think I've ever done. Just sitting in the woods. What are you going to do? I'm hunting, but what are you going to do? I'm going to sit in the woods for 2 hours and be quiet.
Well, you got to have the mindset for it too. Again, I think it's being in that place, being in a place where, it's expectations, right? And expectations create resentments. And if you're just there to get a deer and it's your only reason to be there, you're going to end up frustrated and pissed off, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But
there's a quote that somebody said about, the number of people that are actually in tree stands that don't know the tree that they're in. The number of people that sit in tree stands and they can't tell you the species of tree that they're sitting in.
Right. And, yeah,
you
probably
know?
not
So
very many.
it's been, I feel really blessed to know that, and, you know, to know the ecology of the land and to know the trees. You know, I know the feeling of what it's like to sit in an aspen
Yeah.
for 2.5 hours,
Yeah.
and I can change that. You know, it just, it's part of my world, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. That is very interesting. Like that, as an arborist, not just the trees, but well, all the trees around, pretty much all the species in our forest we know, well, all of them, and then even a
Yeah,
lot of the ground covers and shrubs.
yeah,
So you're familiar with certain parts of that. Like when I'm out with an ecologist or wildlife biologist, and they're looking at or even an entomologist, like they're looking at a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't know, right?
yeah,
So they
yeah.
might be sitting there looking at all the insects and all the things they know, but I think that's where people that are call themselves naturalists or nature, like they talk more about nature because it's all encompassing. Whereas arborists, we tend to be a little biased to the plants, or the trees.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's been a good, like, I don't know, to be able to sit in the woods is a really important part of my life.
And Tony, I'm sure you can relate. I mean, I guess we would call you a hunter, but we could call you a tree sitter too.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, I get some of my best sleep in the woods when I go hunting. I catch up on things, get some good reading done. Yeah. Well, I always figured that's why they call it hunting, not killing, right? Um, I mean, I've been out. There's been phases of my life where I wasn't hunting anything. I was just out there to kill shit. Not necessarily a great way to go through life, but you're young and you learn. But yeah, I hadn't realized, like, just having grown up as an arborist in a tree family. I think we talked about this before. Like, it's never been like my dad never said, "Hey, go stand by that big tree." My dad was like, "Go stand by that white oak," and as I got older, half the time it was in the scientific name. I'm getting botany lessons when I'm going to stand by the Quercus alba, you know. And so I've never really. I've always known the tree that I've leaned my tree stand against, right? I tend to pick my hunting areas by trees that produce nuts, right? Like, because I know it, like, it's what they eat, things like
yeah,
that. So I've been privileged, and I hadn't realized how much of a privilege that is to be able to do that. How many people don't have that, what I consider to be a basic knowledge. It's not to pat myself on the back. It's just, it's always been there for me. And a lot of people have had to learn it a lot
right.
harder. It was just sort of given to me, and I didn't understand the value of that until later, like under.
Yeah, you realize that. I realize that when my boys will correct other people for saying pine cones,
Yeah.
and they'll look at them and say, "Not a pine cone. It came from a spruce
Spruce
tree."
cone.
Yeah, it's a spruce cone. It's
Exactly.
not a pine cone. What are you talking about? And so that's, yeah, that ability that, we've passed that on to our kids too. Now, I mean, that ability to look at the tree and identify that tree and say that's an individual and that's a grouping of a different species. Like, what are you talking about, pine cone?
I was just doing a chainsaw course up towards Delaware Water Gap, which is the northeast corner of Pennsylvania, and it was for a township. And one of the guys had a tree stand on township land. He was allowed to hunt, and it was up against an ash tree, which of course was dead from EAB, emerald ash borer. And it's like literally it's laying on the ground now. The tree stand is just twisted into this like post-apocalyptic thing, and the whole tree failed. And it was, I don't know, probably a 25-inch DBH tree. The whole thing, like they fail. And he's like, I was just in that tree like 2 months ago. I'm like, oh my, like I run from those trees in wood because I know they're going to fall over. And it just how
Yeah.
much little understanding there is around, even something as basic as a tree that dead. Like, yeah, I probably don't want a tree standing that one, especially not an ash tree on the east coast of the United States. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's not a paid job. It's not an occupation. So you don't get OH&S for getting hurt hunting.
Right.
So, who knows how many people, I mean, I've hunted quite a while, and I know one person that that has fallen climbing into the tree, and landed on his. He was sitting in a tree. I don't know what he was going up for exactly, but he was sitting back at camp at the end of the day, and we were like, "What's going on?" And his rifle was broke in half.
Oh,
because he fell and landed on his rifle was on his back, right? Fell and landed on the gun and broke the stock.
jeez.
And he was really sore too, because but it was like, wow. And I don't think we know how many times that's happened. And where people have fallen either bow hunting or for whatever reason, but usually you're bow hunting in a tree. And, you don't know what you're looking at. You could fall.
Yeah. I've had the opposite experience. I have to teach myself not to lean away from the tree when I'm in a tree stand, because I'm so used to being tied into a tree. Like, it's just nothing for me to want to lean back and reach out and do something. I'm like, oh shit, I'm not tied in. It's like, don't do that. It's like, go the other way around.
Well, you mentioned Norm, Peter. Norm loved using his versatile harness for hunting. And he would just tie in because it had the bosun seat in it.
Yep.
And he'd just sit there in that thing, and he could move around. Like he could move around the trunk real easy, eh?
Whereas he was way ahead of his time. I mean,
go ahead.
There's a huge group of people that are doing that now, and there's manufacturers making these seats, and I laugh when I see it. It's like, we've got you guys just needed to call us 20 years ago.
Really?
we could have showed you how it's all done.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a unique way to hunt. It's beautiful to sit in an actual seat, a saddle, to sit in a saddle and hunt. I mean, you can move way more. Who didn't think of this 30, 40 years ago? You can move way more fluidly, like we move around the tree to prune it or remove it or whatever. But well,
even coming down and going up, you can just put a rope in it.
Yeah, and then you're secured the whole time, and it's this organic way of being in a tree, not some metal seat. Like, and I enjoy that too, but it feels a little more organic when you're tied in.
People always ask me that too, and I'm like, oh hell no, that's too much like work. This is my time off. Like, I don't, I want to be tied into this tree. Like, come on, that's like work.
That's what I was just thinking.
It's like, man, let's do it. And, people ask me like, whoa, that harness looks great. And then when you start telling them the price, they're like, well, maybe not. It's like, you get a lot of tree stands for the amount of gear I use to get into a tree.
Yeah, that's the thing I always find interesting too. I find it for hunting, it's easier to just slam the ladder up against it with the tree stand on top, but yet it probably isn't. Like when I think, like I remember I packed my tree stand out last fall, strapped to my back, and carried it like 3 kilometers because where I hunt, I don't want to drive out there. So it's like, it would have been easier carrying a rope and a harness and a throw line.
Yeah. And yet I'm the same way, like it's something different. Like you're not strapping up to go to work every day. You're climbing, and I do. I probably should tie in to the trees when I'm hunting, but I free climb up, and I screw in the foot pegs and I free climb up, and and I just have this level of confidence doing that, and it feels like something, I don't know, almost like I guess it is dangerous, but it feels like I'm doing something illegal when you do it. You're getting up 15, 20 feet up a tree and you're not tied in, and you're sitting on a metal seat with ratchet straps holding the thing on, and it just seems so counterintuitive to what I do on a daily basis. It's not work at all. At all.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think that's partly why it is for me too. It's like, it's funny though how it's in your head, the awareness. Like I'm leaning it up there, and then I'm climbing up carefully, and then I get up, we're putting the strap around until I got this thing tight. Anything could technically happen. Wouldn't I look funny?
Yeah.
Well, for the record, I just put up a new tree stand this weekend, and I actually do stay tied in when I'm securing the tree stand until all the ratchet straps are nice and tight. So I do use the.
So do you wear a harness?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I had to remove a little deadwood. We did the whole Arborists thing on this on my cherry tree stand. So yeah, but I end up doing that work a lot for like friends and stuff too, because I just got this new tree stand. And they're like, well, let me help you with that before it goes terribly wrong. And of course, my tree stand comes with all these instructions. You're going to need 3 guys to set this up. I'm like, no, I got like $3,000 of rigging gear. I'll get this thing up. No problem. Right? I had a double whip tackle systems going. It was like 400 meters of rope. It was awesome.
Peter, we call it the Human Forestry Podcast because and we were kind of talking about it, how much their trees can teach us. I believe that, and how much trees have taught me, and I guess asking people how they feel about that, or relay ways that trees have taught them either life lessons or just have taught them to be a person or live. And have you does that prompt any thought in you or any stimulus at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my first 5 years in the tree industry seems like a blur, but there's moments there that there's specific ones that stand out. Like I was climbing big poplar tree on a golf course. Steve Draper was on the ground, one of my mentors. He was there when I first got in, and I was terrified. I got up to the top of this tree, and for me, it was a pretty big poplar, and I could barely move. I couldn't make the cut. I was freaking out. I got out of the tree. Steve got up and he kind of looked at me and he said, what is going on? And then, I watched this guy do all the cuts so smoothly and efficiently and easily. And those moments of growth that the tree can teach you, it wasn't that, it was all in your head. That was all in your head. That wasn't an actual real thing. It was all in your head. So there's moments like that. And I've had lots of those moments where those pivotal moments of growth have been up in trees, where the calculations in your head, they all add up into disaster. And then you watch somebody do it and it's like, they did that so easily. Like you were calculating wrong, or you added fear into the calculation and you weren't working with the tree organically. You were trying to work against what the tree was telling you to do. There can be dignity in the way a tree gets removed, and there can be dignity in that death, and you weren't doing it right, and the tree was trying to tell you that. So that ability to communicate and to listen to what that tree is trying to tell you has been important in every aspect of my life. So we view trees as a species, an individual species, and we view them as so different than we are, and they are genetically very different, but they also communicate very similarly to the way we as communities communicate. The way a pack of dogs will communicate to each other, the way you watch, like I have sheep at home, and you watch that flock of sheep, the way they communicate, the way they tell each other when there's danger, the way they follow each other around, the way they communicate with the dog that's trying to get them to do something that they don't want to do. So these interspecies communications, I find trees have taught me a lot about that. You don't have to be a tree to talk with the trees. You just have to learn to talk tree.
Interesting. Well, yeah, and I mean, you have the perspective of being active in not just with your dogs, but with horses as well. So horses, dogs, and
right,
in this case, sheep. But I mean, and you do it, like, well, kind of sort of competitively, where you get to practice and you have to demonstrate your ability to communicate with your dogs. Was your horse part of it too?
You could do horseback stuff, but I haven't competed in horseback. But I mean that ability to communicate on the interspecies level is, and again, when you look back at all these times, you don't realize that that's what you were learning. I thought I was learning to do a proper pruning cut. I put my saw here, I cut in this motion, and then this happens, and there's a reason why you put your saw there. But really what you're learning to do overall is to communicate with that tree. Like it's telling you what it wants you to do, and so you're doing right by it. And when you look at a forest, or you look at an urban forest, you're looking at the way the trees interact with each other. Well, how are these trees talking to each other? And then how am I going to go talk to them? And that, when you're starting a young colt, you don't speak the same language. When you're starting a horse, it doesn't speak your language and you don't speak its. So you're learning how to communicate, and you start with your body language on the ground, and you teach it and it teaches you what you're trying to tell each other. And then there's these moments of brilliance where you realize that you've communicated and it's communicated with you, and now you're chatting, now you're talking. And then when you can get up on its back, and it seems hard, it seems like a lot of work, it seems like you're leading the conversation all day long. But then there's times like this past weekend at a branding where you don't feel like you've done any of the talking, where you're riding that horse, you're roping some calves, you're working together, and at the end of the day, you haven't had any arguments. It's been a very fluid conversation, and it's not a conversation that you had to think about. You didn't have to put the words together with any type of, it just flowed. I guess that's an important word in tree work, in dog work, in horse work, in anything that you do. There's that word flow. Yeah, and the other day, and I have had the opportunity to work with some younger subcontract climbers, because I run a very small company. So if we get a bigger job, it's really handy to have subcontract climbers. So I hired a subcontract climber, and at the beginning of the day, I had my bucket truck there, and I was in my bucket, and I looked down, and there's this kid running on the ground, back and forth. So I got my bucket down, and I called him over, and I said, "Listen, there's going to be some flow today." I said, "But you have to allow that flow to happen." And I said, I'm not big into production anymore. And I'm not big into people running on the ground. I said, these group of trees are going to come out today. They've got decay in them. They're near some targets. They're going to come out today. And I said, if you can find where that flow happens, then it's going to be a conversation. But if you're going to run back and forth, then it's going to be an argument. And that ability to get into that level of flow throughout the workday. I mean, look at the trees. They've been there for how many years? 30, 40, 50 years. And you're going to run while removing them, So it's the same. That's been a big lesson too. I think the horse world brought that into the tree world for me. And again, into the dog training world, is that ability to get into the flow state. You watch a good climber, they're not struggling in that tree. They're in that flow state, like you watch the guys at the Masters Challenge, and when you see those climbers at the end of the Masters Challenge, and you just know it, that climb was good, but you can't pinpoint exactly the little things in that tree that they did that made it look so impressive or so good. They were having that conversation with the tree. There was no arguments. They got into that flow state. They saw the energy of the tree. They were with it, and they flowed with it the whole time. And when they it's almost like they don't hit the ground when, it, Dwayne, and probably Tony as well. When you watch those guys at the Masters, they float down. They don't drop out of the tree. Those guys that win the Masters, they float.
Now you're talking.
But yeah, that flow state, that ability to not argue to get your way in the trees has been a massive lesson. Slow down. We'll get there. So
that's very interesting.
And well, that's the way I kind of it, and I shouldn't say in my old age, but my older age than I used to be. You're taught as a young kid to come in and produce. You're here to produce. That's what I pay you for. So the more you can get down on the ground in an hour, the more you're worth. Your worth is based on the amount that you produce.
Right.
But now, if there's something wrong with the amount of money you come in with it as a crew leader at the end of the day, that's not the fault of the person that's out there trying to produce. Maybe your estimating should have been a little bit better. Maybe you can allow that conversation to happen with the trees instead of pushing production.
Yes.
And maybe the incidents and accidents would reduce a little bit as well, because I'm sure once you're in that flow state and you're having the conversation with the urban forest and that conversation with the trees, that safety would likely go up,
Yeah, I would have to agree. How would you, for people listening, how would you, suggest, or even people that you work with, like you got down out of the bucket, or you lowered your bucket to talk to the guy you're working with that day that was running around or running fast. Like, how do you mentor or teach someone or coach someone to to talk to the trees or listen or hear their language? What do you say? How do you demonstrate it?
Well, I think we got there that day, and that was an eye opener for me, and that was an important day because I haven't worked with a whole like I mentor the way I mentor, and so I've never been. That was an important day for me because it really struck me because here was a new person on site, and all of a sudden you're seeing the way 95% of the other tree companies are operating, and that's not the way I want to retire. That's not the way I want to approach trees. So that mentorship needs to happen from the get go,
Yeah.
and you need to allow people to grow into their positions and to get into that mentality of now I'm working with a living thing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That some people see them as big blades of grass, and some people see them as a community all to themselves.
Mhm.
But you're still working with a living thing. So
Yeah. Well, and Shigo talked a lot about that, about dignity with trees, giving, like, having a respect for the livingness of it,
yeah,
the life that it represents. And, I guess some trees get a little more reverence than others, as they earn a place for, often being, I think of the comfort maple in Ontario there that has, just it's received now. It gets the homage it gets because of its size, age, and someone chose to give it that recognition, right? And
yeah,
now it has it, but not every sugar maple in Ontario gets that treatment, right? But and it's an interesting conversation. I think in general, trees. I'm going to use the word deserve a bit more respect or more respect, but on the same token, everything does. It's not just the
yeah,
trees. Getting back to that nature concept, the habitat, and it's a trend now too, or as we're learning more, like habitat in the trees, the trees you're working in, is there habitat? What else is living? Because trees are connected to
yeah,
so many things. We're not
yeah,
just removing the tree, we might be removing a whole bunch of other things with it, and affecting so many other lives, literally. And I think that's one thing I'm fascinated by First Nation culture, I think, is there seems to be, at least in the renaissance of First Nations finding themselves again, or getting back to where they were from, so to speak. Uh, at least that's how I interpret it. But there seems to be a stronger connection to all living things and a reverence for that, like that we are a part of the earth. We're not
yeah,
above the rest. We're a part of all things in the forest, in the grasses, in the plains. And we have the blessings and the gift of them giving us life and shelter and food, in the form of
yeah,
harvest, and it's all worthy of respect. And even though even though they would harvest the buffalo and the deer and whatever, they would always give something back and recognize it. I think that's
yeah,
it wasn't that they were doing anything monumental. It was just taking that moment to recognize the gift and respecting it. And I think that's the difference,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because I one of I go to we go to the conference every year, right? We're at the tree conferences, and it's I love them. I love the community. I love the people. I'm not trying to knock any of the scientists that get up on stage, but to me, that scientific Eurocentric view of how trees impact community is lacking a huge part of what that species is there, like their impact on our lives. And I think we're forgetting that the Aboriginal people have a massive history with nature
Yeah.
and with trees.
Yeah.
And that Eurocentric view of trees is very modern. It's only a blip in time.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when we're planning last year's conference, and I really, really, really wanted to include that view. I wanted to include that view in our world as arborists, and I wanted to introduce that view to some people who maybe didn't even clue into that view was there. So I gave Dave a call, Dave Lutz,
Yeah.
and I said, listen, Dave, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to approach an Aboriginal person and say, can you please talk at our conference about your connections with trees? I said, I'm not asking for a scientific, I just would like an Aboriginal person up there to talk about an Aboriginal connection with trees.
Yeah.
And he said, Peter, this is right up my alley. And I said, you do this? He said, yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely love to. And so that's that's that view that I think is missing from a lot of arborists.
Yeah.
Day-to-day work, you get in there and you're taught about what a scientific pruning cut is, and the science behind that pruning cut, and the science behind why that disease is affecting that tree. And it's a lot of science that's going on in our day-to-day worlds, but we're forgetting that there was a conversation that's been happening there for how long with people that have had these connections with not only trees but the nature surrounding them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important viewpoint to bring into our world. Bring into the world that it's not just a scientific process. The scientific process is important. You need to know why you're making that pruning cut, but there's also a massive history behind, there's a culture there that's appreciated that tree way longer than us as arborists have.
Yeah. And everything around the tree, the grass, the wind, the sun, the rain, and the plants, everything, it's quite, and I don't know, there's something that is, well, at least for me, I think a lot of people might feel this way, but I certainly do. It feels right, or it resonates energetically. Like there's like, it makes sense. It's like, like why, I don't know. Had we had that view when we settled this land, so to speak, like fields didn't need to be linear, there could have been natural areas, like areas that were more naturally given to growing crops, because there already were grasses there. We didn't have to clear all the woods, and who knows what it would be like, production could be as what it is or more. It's just a way of thinking, right? But instead we, the railroad and the agriculture, the way it was plot gridded out, and just like so much in the name of development and civilizing, fences and roads and water courses have been changed and altered. And we don't, nowadays there's more attention to it, but so much has already occurred in the last 100 years,
Well, again, with that Aboriginal perspective on trees and nature, you talk about, they harvested the buffalo, but they used it all. So there's a value in that entire animal. But I think as arborists, we don't value the entire animal. Well, I shouldn't say we. I think there's a trend where people don't value it. That tree is dead. Get it out of there. There's no value in it anymore. Right. That tree is chipped. Let's find the quickest and easiest spot to dump these chips for free because there's no value there anymore. So in actually, like I've stopped dumping my chips. I've stopped dumping my chips off because when I look at that, I'm trying to change people's minds. There's value there.
Yep.
I've removed your tree for sure, and I've chipped up the tree into my truck, but that doesn't mean that I've removed all value from it. So I'm going to let these wood chips sit here. We're going to turn them a couple times, and in 2 months they're for sale. No, I'm not dropping off at your place for free. There's value there. We're going to, they do an absolute amazing thing to your land. There's value there. There's value in that live wood. There's value in the dead wood. There's value in the lumber. There's value in the forest if you just leave it standing. But that mindset of the fact that there's no value left. Let's find the quickest spot to dump these logs and the quickest and easiest spot to dump these wood chips, because they're actually, not only do they not have value, they're a hindrance to our production.
Yeah. Same with an old log laying in the ground, or, even a spar that's broke off, but it's not ever going to be dangerous. It's just, but it could be massive habitat, but no, it's ugly. We've got to remove it. Like that whole concept of like, well, it's safe now. So what? Leave the spar sitting there. Something's going to nest in it. Something's going to feed in it. There's no, it's not hurting anything. And it, especially big old stumps or spars, they're kind of cool to look at. And people always stop and look at a big old log or something. There's something to it, even in that state. And it's very true. Again, I think it is a way of looking at things, or a mindset, so to speak. But I remember when you were talking about the chips, Shigo would always talk about green waste, and he would say, green waste, it's a human term. He said, there's no such thing as green waste. And I've never thrown anything out of my yard. Never. He said, because so he would always take the chips or take the mulch or make brush piles, or because things live in that. Like it changes, it creates habitat. It if nothing else, it's firewood, but there's some value in it, right? And this sterilized concept of, well, it's tree failed, cut it down, remove it, grind the stump, let's get something else. Yeah, just dump the stuff. Yeah, but I think you're right. I think there is a trend going away from that to a certain degree, for sure. Tony, do you notice that in your travels as well, your communities, or?
It's coming around a little bit, I think, not as much as I'd like to see. I think maybe because my appreciation for trees has risen, it seems everybody else's has gone down, if that makes any sense. Maybe because the bar is higher, I think, for me. A lot of these lessons, I didn't understand these things till much later in my career, but no, it's getting that way a little bit. It's still very, tree work in general here is still very financially driven, right? And there's a lot of disrespect for trees.
Trend? What is the trend where we all look back and say, I'm not realizing this until later in my life. I didn't realize this until later in my career. We've all said it, and we've all heard people say it. And how do we get to the point where we're teaching the arborists coming out of college, or the arborists getting their first job, where we can now get them on that program where maybe they're in their 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and oh yeah, I realized, I was taught that when I was first starting.
I think the trend's called age. And but joking aside, many of these lessons that I now appreciated in my 20s and 30s, I couldn't have possibly appreciated because there wasn't a frame of reference. So as I think now, what's the value? And we were talking earlier, about what's the value of the podcast. The value of the podcast, the value of this is planting a seed. Never underestimate the, that ability to plant that seed. I think that maybe somewhere down the road in my 20s and 30s, these seeds were planted for me by somebody else in my position now. At least I hope so. Maybe some of them just came from time and experience, but I think that there's a lot of the messages that I now appreciate that I couldn't have possibly appreciated in my 20s because there was no frame of reference, right? It's hard to be conservative when you don't have anything to conserve, right? I was a much bigger risk taker in my 20s because what was I going to lose? A beat up pickup truck, a 10 millimeter handgun, and a 6-pack of beer. Take it all. There was no frame of reference for me there. Now there's a lot more to be lost, right?
I've been thinking a lot about that same thing too, and especially with social media, and I'm looking at these climbers, and you're looking at the stuff they're doing, and in my head it's like, you're there with them. I'd like to be there with them, but in the same token, I'm not at all. I'm not at all as keen on removing the biggest tree, doing the biggest crane lift, getting into the biggest storm damage scenario. And back in, that used to be just the best day ever. Yeah. And now, do you pass on that torch, or do you become wise? Were we idiots back then? Have we smartened up?
I think it's getting back to the human forest, you've got saplings and young trees that are able to withstand and do different things, and you can't do as much with them. You aren't going to get much firewood out of a 10-year-old tree, or what, you got to let it grow, and that tree serves a purpose as well. It's high functioning or high synthetic photosynthetic producing, but then as the tree matures and ages, its value changes too, right? And they're all equally important, and they're all part of the forest, right? But they serve different purposes at different times, and that's like us as youths, right? And there's a great value. I get asked to do tree jobs here and there, and recently an old friend asked me I got to take a top out of an old spruce that's died, and they don't want to remove the tree, and the top's died, and whatever, fine. But there's a younger fella that I know that and he's taken some of our courses, and he's more a rancher now, and he ranches with his dad, but he still does tree, but he's young, right? Or he's a lot younger than I am. And I'm like, perfect. You go up there and do that. I'll tell you what to do, and I could go do it, and maybe I will go up with them or whatever, but it's just, there's a purpose for everybody, right? And you have that energy, that you have, that's seemingly unreserved, and at it never exhausts, you don't think of conservation because you don't, referencing your pickup truck, 6-pack of beer, and your handgun. It's like, If you lose it, you just get another one. You don't even think about it being an issue. You just, I'll get more. You make more, you'll produce more. It seems so easy and like a young tree, it just, you could cut it a lot harder and it'll respond a lot faster, a lot easier, right? It's an old tree. It's like, yeah, no, just take. I'm not going to regrow that branch. I'm just going to let that one go. And I think it's just the stage of things. But I do believe also what Tony said, and maybe the podcast can serve to do that. And even if people are just listening to their boss, listening to it and hear clips and snips of it, like, oh, I'm not that tree. That's a bunch of old guys podcast. But it's there's you don't know the seeds that get planted. You just have no idea. And how much. Where did the thoughts that you have now come from, Peter? You think about it, like where did they? How did you get to the point where you would think to ask Dave, and how did that happen for you? Like, how do you think it happened?
I don't know if anybody planted that. I mean, I went to university for a lot of years, and I never ended up with an actual paper degree. I think I realized after 5 or 6 years of going to university that I wasn't going to end up with that piece of paper. But I was taking courses and classes that I wanted to learn about. So I was taking Aboriginal literature, Aboriginal philosophy, Aboriginal law, Aboriginal justice and law, earth sciences. Like I was all over the place. Philosophy, psychology. Like I never actually entered into the realm of major or minor. I just took what I wanted to take. I wanted to be an English teacher. I think I wanted to be an English teacher coming out of university. But when I left university, I had a great education and I had a great appreciation for those kind of things, but I didn't have a degree. So I think those seeds might have been planted back then when you're reading Aboriginal short fiction and you're learning about the history of the Aboriginal peoples, and there's a specific course called Aboriginal Justice and the Law because it's a different, that's always kind of been in my mind since then. And I'd like to approach the world that way. And when I'm canoeing, I'm not, I'm in that world, that world of appreciation for nature and that world of communion with nature and one with that community. And there's something different about paddling a canoe that brings you back to those, the times that maybe white man wasn't in North America and you're paddling around a canoe and it's quiet and you're with that nature and you can kind of get into that mind space.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to bring that into the tree world, like there's a history there. Why can't it be part of our world now as we approach this massive species that covers most of our planet?
Well, I think that's one of the nuances or attractions in tree work. That you can't, anybody that gets into tree work, especially if you climb, but even if you don't, like handling wood, and it's such a visceral activity. Like it's hard. It hurts. Like even when you're young and fit, like there's just parts of it that it's physically demanding, and so you have, and it's tactile, and you realize, like, there's smells, there's sounds, there's stuff in cavities, there's sap that's different, there's leaves, like even just go with smells alone and textures, and like you realize you're in a very, very organic environment, even if you're just cutting a tree down, the sawdust and there's something about it, and those that connect with that, like they may not realize what exactly they're connecting with, but I think it is part of this organic living thing connection. Like it's not blood, but it's wood chips. It's not. But there's sometimes. I remember one time. Well, anytime, like people will talk about cutting a tree and water rushing out of a cavity, and they're just fascinated by it. And they describe the smell and the look of it. Like, where do you do? There's not a lot of jobs where you get to do that kind of stuff, right? And that's, I think, part of the attraction, and it is a connection to the nature of it, right? But maybe we don't physically identify it, right?
Yeah. And other people identify that too. And it's funny that you mentioned that. We were at the lawyer's office the other day and I had to pop in the middle of my workday to sign papers because we bought 80 acres just east of Elk Island Park.
Yeah,
a beautiful little spot. But we were assigning papers to the lawyers. I had my saw pants on. I don't know what we were doing that day, but something with spruce.
Yeah.
And we were going to leave the office, and she commented. The lawyer commented. She said, "Oh, you must be working with spruce trees today," and I'm coated in it. You're covered in it. You're immersed right in it, and other people can see that as well.
Yeah.
And I, to be honest, I didn't know. Like, when you're walking around, you don't really realize that you're absolutely immersed in the tree world. That not only do you look like it, but you smell like it.
Yeah. Yeah. The definite. Yeah, you kind of take for granted the smell of wood chips and fresh chips, like.
But what a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing. Because I don't pass by a lawyer at the grocery store and turn around and go, "Oh, you smell like paper and typing." Like, you must be a lawyer, like, to be entered into that visceral world where you smell like what you're working with, and other people can appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
The amount of sawdust in and around my house.
Well, you sure
on a
can tell a
daily
farmer, especially a pig farmer or a chicken farmer, there's no doubt.
Yeah. But those things that provide us joy, those activities that provide us joy, and then luckily that I have a job that provides me joy, is generally visceral things. Like, when I'm done riding horses at a cattle branding, you can smell. You can smell the leather. You can smell the horse sweat. You can smell the cows. You can smell. There's all these things that
big time
that are left with you at the end of the day, and those things that you're left with at the end of the day tend to be more joyful and more rewarding than if you're not left with anything at all.
Well, something that I've found recently that it's quite interesting, because I'm sort of kind of retiring, and I still find, like, physically demanding things. Like, it's something that you've got to motivate yourself to do. This could apply to exercise. Well, for me, it applies to exercise and or work. But once you get into it, and the feeling of fatigue and effort, like, that comes with when you start to sweat, particularly, like when you reach that point where you're working hard enough at whatever it is that you break a sweat. And for me, I always feel it on my nose. And I know once I have a drip of sweat on my nose, I've reached that point. And that's at that point, I can work like that for a long period of time, maybe not quite as long as I used to, but when you break from it, there's a real sense of not only accomplishment, but a feeling that you can only get from that exertion. And I think it's something that, if you don't do that, something really happens. Like, there's something, either toxins aren't released, or I don't know what it is, but there's something in that. And it doesn't have to be doing tree work, but that concept of busting a move and physically doing something, whether it's, I don't know, but something that makes you sweat. Like, it's got to be hard enough that you got to work. There's something in that. And tree work, it's inherent. Like, you can't, there's no such thing as like, that's when people say, well, can you just get that one branch? It's just not that easy. Like, nothing's that easy really in tree work.
That's super funny. That's a big part of my young career, is when we would joke about it too. I remember Steve Draper and I on the ground, and we'd always joke about it. We'd look at each other and be like, "Yeah, but can you just go get that one up there?" Because he would just, or I would just pull my rope out of the tree, or he would just pull his rope out of the tree, and I'd tap him on the back, and you go, "Can you just go back up and get that one little branch up there?" Funny.
Yeah.
And you asked where that comes from, and then as you're talking, as I'm talking, I'm thinking back, and a lot of that is who I started my career with, and you all know Frank Chips. He offered me the job. I worked for Frank and with Frank for a lot of years, and you look at an all around outdoorsman. So when Frank and I'd be walking out, and he introduced me to trees, he introduced me to hunting, he introduced me to horses. So when you're walking around with Frank, he knows the ecology of the area. He knows where the moose will go. He knows where the deer will be. And so that introduction into the world of not the tree as an individual in a backyard, but the tree as part of an ecosystem that contains all the animals and the birds and the plants, it comes from him, really, and introduced into my life and my career. Because for him, there's one specific tree in the forest could be as beautiful as that big tree in the backyard, right? There'd be these moments and these places that contain these beautiful trees, and you'd go hike to them. you'd know where the animals would be around there. And so a big part of that was him. And I think to not recognize that as him being a big part of my career, it wasn't just about how to remove that tree in the backyard or how to lift that tree out with a crane. There was more to this life and more to tree work than just that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's always a little something, that that's worth sometimes pondering where it came from and recognize.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's it's no different than the talking about the First Nation stuff, like honoring where you've come from and the impact it's had on you. I think it's easy to forget, where and how things started, and all of a sudden there you are, and if you fail to recognize the process that got you there, and not just the good parts, but the hard parts that brought you there too, because in one of our podcasts, the Mark Pritchett, I'm going to say his name. I don't know if I say it right. He says no one can say it right. Mark, the splicing guy, but he talks about shadow mentors, and that one really stuck with me. That, and you can have. I think there's people that have been both. Like some people that were bright mentors and then also dark mentors. And the same person sometimes can be both.
Absolutely,
and that,
I definitely agree with
all that brings us along.
I absolutely agree. I thought about that too, Dwayne, after that, because that struck me as well. The Jack Phillips and the walking through the forest without a saw, and Mark and his shadow mentors, and those were big moments where these people that teach you, and you might disagree with 90% of what they're teaching you, but they've definitely taught you, and whether I'm not going to do it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was a teaching that person taught me. I'm not going to do it this way, or I'm going to take that 10% because that's brilliant, and that other 90%, I can recognize that in other people now. I can recognize that. I can recognize that 50% that I don't want to teach people that way.
And I think, like an old tree, there's beauty in or like an aged person. You can recognize it without judgment. That's, I think, the real key. I think when I was younger, I did more judging, and I was more like, it wasn't just that they were different, but they were wrong. And I think there's a big difference. Like, I don't agree with it doesn't mean they're wrong. I just don't agree with it. It doesn't resonate with me. So, and to accept it as that, because otherwise, I can be, you create alienation or separation, and the forest doesn't do that, right? It all connects and benefits somehow, some way. Like a big tree fails ultimately and crunches into another tree and gets stuck in it or wounds it. The other tree just, what do they do? I don't know if trees ever get mad at each other. That's an interesting concept. Whereas humans, we definitely struggle with that, or I have, right? And the less I do that, the more harmonized I can be with everyone, I feel like. And that's a big lesson was for me to learn. And I had to, there was things in my life had to happen to get clarity of mind to be able to do that. But
well, that's a big part of me working with animals as well. I mean, you walk out and you take your dogs out of the kennels and you're going to go work them. They don't give a crap what you're wearing, how you're dressed, how dirty you are. They're happy to see you almost every time. They're happy to see you.
Always.
And always happy to see you. They're absolutely, and they'll judge you. I'm not saying they'll never not judge you, but it's for your actions. They'll judge you for your actions, not, So what you do and how you interact with those animals is very important. Not so much how you look, not,
Yeah, it's true. And the consequences are there too. Like the connection deepens with even an animal, right? And, and I wonder, it's obvious with animals, particularly dogs, horses, but this might be a good closing discussion. But is it possible? And you've talked about it already, Peter, developing that flow with the tree. Like when you have a good relationship with an animal like a horse or a dog, can you develop that good relationship, that flow relationship where you're interacting unspokenly, non-verbally with the tree, like you do with the dog?
Absolutely.
I would say that you would say yes.
Yeah, I would absolutely say yes. Yeah, because we've all had those climbs. You've had them, Dwayne, and I guarantee, yeah, like everybody's had those climbs. Sometimes it's at a tree climbing competition. Sometimes it's just that one tree that you've pruned. Generally not removals. I don't find it's not really,
Right.
you don't really remember those removals the same way you'll remember a nice tree that you've pruned. And generally it's just the client wants the dead wood maybe taken out of it and a little bit of tucking in here and there to accommodate wires or house or,
Yeah. Yeah.
but when you remember those climbs, I remember those climbs and I can remember specific ones. And that's because I really truly believe it's because you're in that flow state and you're in that conversation with the tree. You're not, like I talked about earlier, you're not arguing with it. You're having a conversation with it and you're entering that flow state. And I don't know if that's something you can teach. I don't. I think you can teach rope dynamics and you can teach scientific method and you can teach a lot of that stuff. You can teach how to get into the tree. But I think young arborists need to be taught maybe that there is a flow state there and try to get into it and try not to rush your job too much. And once you'll know when you're there and you'll remember that climb and you'll never forget that tree. You'll drive by that tree 2, 3 years, 4 years down the road and I remember that climb.
You know, people would ask me when I was at the college, like, what's your best student? Like who's got the highest marks, as if that's the best student, right? And even when I would teach, particularly when I would teach pruning, I would just say, I'm not going to teach you to be a good pruner. I can't teach you to care about the work you do. I can't teach you that. I can teach you how to make good cuts, and I can teach you why cutting too much hurts the tree and why topping's bad. And I can explain how decay enters from a flush cut. And I can, and you can pass all the tests, but whether you care enough to do carefully, to cut carefully, to not cut too much, to not,
Yeah.
Whether you do that is up to you. I can only, you can kind of mentor it, but you can't really teach someone to care. I don't think. Tony, I know
Well,
what you.
I don't think.
Go ahead.
No, I don't think you can teach it either, but you can also not shut it down. And that is important. And that's where that shadow mentor thing really resonated with me, because when you see somebody, when you see a student, when you see a young arborist and all they see that is an opportunity, I can slow down and I can get into this flow state. I can get into this conversation with the tree. Don't shut that down. Allow that. So a big part of the way I teach my young students, I call them students or arboriculture, arborists in training.
Yeah.
But when they come and work with me for the summer, it's just about not shutting them down all the time. It's the same with dogs and it's the same with horses. If you're shutting them down all the time, they're going to quit. You have to have that try, you have to have that ability, and they have to have, if they're afraid of making a mistake, then they're not going to have that ability to try and they're not going to get in there. So a dog that's afraid of making a mistake isn't going to be there when it really counts, because they're going to be afraid to make that mistake. They're going to be afraid to move. So that you can't shut it down. So you can recognize that there's passion in that student, and you can, just show them the door. Hey, there's the science door. I've already opened that up to you and I've showed you everything in the room, but there's this other door here that I'm not going to follow you into. I'm not going to lead you into, but there's the door, and that's yours to go into, and you can explore what's in there. And when you come back, you let me know what you think.
Well, on that note, Tony, you maybe don't know, Peter, that Tony shares some university. He did get his ticket though, or his degree in I think it is actually philosophy, is it not?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I do.
So there's been quite philosophical. What do you feel about what are your comments regarding the flow state and having a conversation with the tree? Now we're talking.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's learned through experience, and it definitely, like you were talking about, Dwayne, has a lot to do with care. I think there's only one way to teach somebody to care, and that is to care. I think you can only teach that through example. Now, whether they choose to learn it or not, it's another conversation, but I think you can. I think understanding the time flow of trees. I know, understanding, like Peter was saying earlier, it's a longer conversation, right? And as such, your actions there's not a reply to that action, that bad pruning cut. You won't see a reply for maybe years, right? So understanding that, when it comes to training and teaching people about this, over the years, I've found that when I start with new climbers, that once they have a basic skill set where their physical moving around in the tree, it's not second nature, but it's not the only thing they're thinking about, right? Then it's time to stop learning climbing. And then it's time to start learning tree and tree biology. So what I demand of them is like, yeah, I'll get you that new piece of gear, but you're also getting a book. All right. You can't have one without the other. And you have to start to understand the tree. And then now whether they take that or not, it is, that every individual is different. And then they have to come to understand that for the longest time in my career, I worked on trees. People would say, what do you do for a living? Oh, I work on trees. There was some subtle point where it shifted. Now I work with trees. And, when you can start to think about it that way and see it that way, then I think it changes a little bit. And how do you teach or mentor that often? And it's not, I've always said time and time again, and this is lessons from tree climbing competitions, either as a competitor or a judge or a volunteer, is a good climber is 1 or 2 steps ahead of themselves. A great climber is 8 or 9 steps ahead of themselves. And the trees totally outpacing that climber. So get in that mentality of that not only longer term, but it's not, yes, I'm here now and I'm doing this in the tree now, but how's that going to affect what's going to happen 9 steps later? And then make that an even broader conversation. How's that going to affect it the next time I climb this tree, whether that's next year, 3 years, 5 years down the road? And just the way I've taught pruning, when I teach pruning, it's simple. We start with 2 rules. 1, the tree doesn't need you. Just get that through your head. We're pruning the tree, but that has nothing to do with the tree. It has everything to do with what we need out of the tree. And the other thing is it doesn't matter what you take out. It only matters what you leave behind. Get those 2 things in your head, and then we can start talking about pruning. So I think for me, it's been a changing the perspective at which I come at it. It's not, it's by people, well, how do you know what to take out? I don't have a clue, but I do know what to leave behind.
Yeah, that's important. Like I said, it's really easy to put a lot of wood on the ground. Really easy.
Yeah, you can get paid by the pound, right?
It's fast. It's fast, but it's a lot harder to know what to leave in the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'll pay you by the pound, the client says.
Yeah.
So we'll yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reverse hourly rate.
I love ironwood.
I only work for clients with big trees. I get paid by the pound.
Yeah. Or sugar maple. Well, Alberta, you never make as much money.
Live oak is my favorite. Everyone would leave the coniferous zone and move into southern, mulberries, live oak, Osage orange. I only work on the heavy trees. We don't do any light pruning.
Well, it's been a great conversation. We we don't have set times for the podcast, but they typically find a sort of a natural sort of segue, and I feel like we've kind of reached that point. It's been a great conversation, and one of our longer than normal ones. It's always around. I'm fascinated by the timing thing because it's never an hour. Rarely. The odd time it has been. I find it. I think it depends on where the people are at. But when someone's just made time for it and they don't have another appointment scheduled per se, we're never on an hour. It's always, I would say it's 70 to 90 minutes ish. In that range, it seems like there's something about that natural. There's something in that natural time frame. I don't know what it is. Would you say, Tony? Have you noticed that?
Oh yeah, I noticed a lot because I edited them, right?
Yeah.
So I see what the total time is, and I always end up somewhere between 70 and 90. Although a little longer is fine. I don't put too. It is what it is. But you're right. There's something about that hour and 15 minutes. Like there's something about that time frame that just seems to maybe it's
well, there's probably
that's as far as I can pay attention. That might be it. Maybe I'm the limiting factor.
Something scientific to it, but I want to thank you, Peter, for a really great conversation where I think Tony would agree, the impromptu. I described it to Judy Shigo as our conversation flows kind of like in the spring when the snow starts to thaw and a little river, a little river flows, or a little, and it hits a branch or a twig, and the water flows a little left and then it goes down right. And that's the way this conversation flows, the way like the spring thaw runs down the hill. And it's just fun because we had Mark on, who's a
Yeah.
major splicer dude, and we never talked about splicing the whole time. And it's just because and it's fun, and so this was
Yeah.
like that, and it was great, and I really appreciated I love the conversation piece about conversation, and that have a conversation with the tree, get in the flow, and now you're talking. That's going to be a phrase I take away. Now you're talking trees with the trees, and also the reference to animals, horses and dogs particularly, and how I'm really going to be thinking about that one, because I definitely can relate to those, because I've worked with horses in my life a lot in the past, growing up particularly, but also and then dogs, and dog's a big part of my life now. And I'm really challenged to see, do I have a relationship with a tree like I've had with the other, like that? That's really fascinating to me. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, it's the I'll just leave you with this one little thought. I think I've sent you this before, Dwayne. We're chatting about horses, but when human beings meet each other, we shake our hands, right? We extend a hand. Here's a weaponless hand. I come in peace. We shake each other's hands. But when horses greet each other, they stick their noses together and they'll breathe each other's breath. And that's their welcome. That's their hello. That's how they get to know each other. So it really is. It's a deep thing for me to walk out there and have the horses come up to you and they stick their noses right in your face, and you'll just breathe each other's breath for a little bit. And you're sharing life with that animal. And so that ability to communicate with that animal, like you can communicate with a tree, you can communicate with a horse, you can communicate with people, and we all communicate a little bit differently.
That's interesting. So
and
the tree
think of that
thing,
next time you see a group of horses and they go stick their
when I was
in
in Thailand, I would go run around this. It was a naval base, and they had this. It was like a military obstacle course that they allowed people to use. So I would take advantage of it, jumping over walls and stuff. It was fun. But when you came around to the main building, and I don't even know what kind of trees they were, which is also fascinating to me, because normally I know trees and I have no idea what kinds. They're big, they're really spreading, and they're old. And the outer canopy came down, so they went up like a mushroom, right? And the outer canopy, you could walk up and touch the tips. And then you'd walk 60 feet to like a 4-foot diameter trunk. And you'd walk on surface roots, and they had just taken over, and there was like 3 of them in a line that were between the beach and the road. And they're really majestic. So I would come around, and every morning I would touch the tips of these branches, and I would just feel them, and I would purposely try to just say, "Hey, man," to this tree, and then I would walk the roots to the trunk, and I would hold the trunk, and I just did it every day. And I just only now realize, like it just suddenly dawned on me, like I connected with that tree every day. Every day I ran that. I didn't sometimes run on the weekends, but I would go out and do that track. And I did that for several months. And I think there was something there. And now I got to go back and check out that tree. But thanks for that. Yeah. But it was tactile, and it was spiritual. And I think that's part of it too. And I think even when you're talking about the horse's breath,
it was a greeting.
And the dog, it's not just it goes beyond the plane of tactile or thought or conscious. It's spiritual, I guess, or energetic. It would be the word I'd have to use. And if you're open to it, like sitting in the forest for time, you hear and see and feel things. And it's not just seeing and feeling, you or seeing and hearing. There's a feel. There's an energy there and the forest embraces and accepts you energetically. And that's why animals will come around, like your vibration or whatever it is. I know it might be a little esoteric here, but that something happens. There's a shift, and that's, I think, what Jack was getting at, and it very much is spiritual.
Well, I'll leave you with this, Dwayne. Remember, we're sitting in. I send you this video all the time, but Scott Prophet and I were playing music in Frank's shop, and what did he call that song? Do you remember what he called that song? It's called. He said, "I've called this song." He said, "Pete and I were out here at hunting camp, and we wrote this song together, and we're calling it Time and Energy, because that's all we have to give to each other is our time and our energy." And a handshake with a human being, I've thought about this a lot. A handshake with a human being takes 5 seconds if it's a long one. But when you're shaking hands with trees and when you're in that forest, that, that time and that energy, it's a half hour, it's 45 minutes, it's an hour, but that's what we give and that's what we receive, that time and energy.
Wow. So that song that we've got recorded he called that time. I don't recall that, time and energy.
Yeah, we'll review. It's called Time and Energy, and that phrase from Scott, I had played in my head all the time, because that's all we have to give to each other, and that's all we have to give to the trees, right? Our time and our energy, and the right amount of time and the right kind of energy.
Yeah, interesting. Well, thank you for that, Peter, and we'll have to maybe figure out a way to get the audio of that song on Tree Actions, Tony. I think we might be able to do that.
We'll figure it out. Put it up on the Patreon page.